Hi, Zoe. We have been working a few times together. My name is Vincent HONORÉ, and I am the Director of Exhibitions at Montpellier Contemporain, a contemporary art center based in the south of France.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Vincent. Yeah, we have worked together a few times before. Always a pleasure. And I am an artist based in London currently and working in lots of different mediums, but we'll talk about that, I guess.
Always a pleasure, and quite a few times a challenge. Maybe we can discuss.
Maybe.
We did together some crazy projects. Thanks to Richard Saltum to allow us to discuss your work. And I think the first question I wanted to ask you is, where did you study and what did you study?
Yeah, so my BA, I studied fine art and visual culture, and that was in Bristol. And that was I finished in 2006 there. So it was kind of like a mix between, it was a pretty like multidisciplinary course, and there was quite a big emphasis on writing and visual culture as part of that as well. Yeah, and then I studied in Glasgow for an MA, and that was, yeah, 2012 I finished that. So again, like a mixed media, and yeah.
This influenced a lot your practice, which is very based on writing and as well a sort of a multidisciplinary approach.
Yeah, I think so. I think like definitely the first degree was really like instrumental in like having a grounding in that anyway. And I was always like, before I studied, I was very much like on the cusp of, I always wanted to do something more applied. Like actually I've always been really interested in craft and like fashion and jewelry and those things, but it never felt quite enough. I always wanted to have this other aspect that was more like, yeah, I guess moved between disciplines and wasn't always functional as well. So I think like that first degree was quite kind of, it allowed me to explore that in more detail.
And what first influenced your work? Which kind of artist you were looking at the beginning?
At the beginning, I really liked Mike Kelly. I was using a lot of like these quite like grimy soft toys in the first, I don't know, yeah, it was like going through a sort of like, I don't know, transitional objects, all these things. I was like interested in ideas on abjection and like these scatter installations that people like Mike Kelly and like Karen Kilimnik as well. I really like, I've always like loved her. Just these like quite creepy setups of watercolors and these things. I was interested, well, she doesn't do watercolors, but I was at the time. And so I guess there was this thing, yeah, that and Carol Rama as well.
Yeah, Carol Rama from the beginning.
Yeah, from the beginning, yeah.
That's
And obviously
interesting.
it's like, you know, yeah, change, but I think they were like quite big deals to me at that point.
Because Kilimnik and Kelly they were quite famous at the time, but Carol Rama was not that famous. Her work had been rediscovered quite recently.
Yeah, it has. It wasn't very well known, and I don't know.
How did you come across her work?
Do you know? I really don't know, but it must have been a tutor, because I had a really good tutor there who kind of like might have put me on to her, or perhaps I could have seen the watercolors somewhere. I don't know. I just remember seeing the watercolors and those like fox furs and like the, you know, like the classic ones with the dismembered boobs and everything, and just being like, oh wow, that's really, yeah, it could have been something to do with like an essay on abjection or something like that someone might have referenced her. But yeah, it was quite different to other things at that time that were around.
And what particular angle of the work by Carol Rama drove you into it? What interested you particularly in this work? Because there's several aspects of the work, several kind of periods as well. She changed a lot.
Yeah, she did change a lot. Like later on, it was much more abstract, I guess.
Yeah.
And you know, like with all the like inner tubes and things like that. And I think it was those early watercolors, like the very fetishistic ones. I mean, it all is, but those ones with like, it was this idea of like these kind of image equations of like these kind of solid, like symbolic different objects that were presented on the page. And like the kind of, I think at the time as well, obviously I was looking a lot of like things like Bataille and that kind of like base materialism type ideas around that. So her work really seemed to like tie in with that, and this idea of like a sort of like ecstatic like world of symbols, but also that like bringing in like notions of these, you know, like there's shit and there's like body parts, but it's not disgusting, it's very ecstatic. So, and I think there was something she wrote which is like about being, or someone wrote about her, which was this idea of being passionate or appassionata, like without, so like, you know, being so subjective, so involved within her like world of symbols and imagery that she didn't really distinguish between like shit and I don't know, jewels or like fox furs, and like her form were all on the same level. It wasn't like a hierarchy. So I guess that's what I was really interested in, or like from my perspective.
And does the figure of the artist, like Carol Rama was such a figure, she was living in this apartment full of objects, she was a very sort of a flamboyant character, influenced you as well? Maybe not personally, but in your creation, in the performance part, and maybe as well in the objects that you create.
Yeah, I think that idea of like a sort of excessive personality, or like creating these things that bleed into like the domestic environment or the another environment that it's not just contained within the work, is I'm interested in for sure. Yeah.
And which work do you consider to be your first work of art?
That's hard.
Oh, it's a very, very complicated question.
Yes, it is. I'm gonna say like something that I made on foundation, which is kind of cheesy, but is like this sheet that was lots of toy eyes on it and like cut out holes. And it was the first thing that I made that was not trying to look, yeah, like beautiful, or this idea of like, you know, like A level, you're so constrained to all this stuff. And I guess it was the first time that I'd really come across these ideas of like trying to have like a symbolic language without it being pushed through, oh, that needs to look good, or it needs to look, oh, you're weird for making that, you know. So it's like I was able to like maybe get out some of these, because I was always doing it before, but it like, yeah, making like stories and things when I was younger, but this was the first thing maybe. Yeah.
And having the confidence to be the author of the work and to present it to others.
Well, yeah, and I remember at the time someone put like rabbit droppings under it. It was in foundation, and I was really like, oh, that's so. It was quite traditional, I guess, quite a lot of what people were doing, and so I was just really affronted by this, but also kind of like, oh God, like that's really, I don't know. Yeah, it was interesting dialogue with someone. Just, yeah.
Because you have been working with a lot of materials, you embrace pretty much everything from fabric to wood to painting to drawings. You're doing installations, video works, performances. It strikes me that you want to create always a sort of narrative and a situation. Just to use a word that Sarah Lucas used for her installation at Sadiko's a few years ago, which involves as well a lot of collaborations with actors, costume designers, musicians. Question I have is, from this sort of environment, what was the premises for you to start working with ceramics? How did you start with this particular material and why?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been really drawn to it as a material because I think it has these qualities of being really seductive, but quite like undervalued in a material sense. I mean, it's really changing now, but like in terms of art, it is.
Mm.
And that you could get this very bodily effect with it. It's something that interacts with the body or is functional, is like, so there are all these things about it, but I think I started using it unfired during my BA. And it was like ideas of like preciousness, I guess, in like porcelain, and then like that being temporary because it wasn't fired. But then, yeah, when I worked with you on that ceremony of the void, and making all of the work for that, that was like the first time I made a really big body of work in it. Yeah.
Because you were mentioning that for you ceramics has a seductive element, but as well a sort of ambiguity between the art object and an object that you can use. So there is an element of performativity that attracts you as well with ceramics.
Yeah, definitely that actually. I should have, I guess that's what this thing of between functional and symbolic, and so like it can be used, and then it becomes a bit unsure about if you display the ceramic afterwards. There's always this like use value, or like this thing that I think you do think of performance when you see an object of ceramic, or for me at least. So yeah.
Are all of your ceramics works potentially usable?
It depends in what way. but yeah, I think they are in a way. Like I want them, either they would be kind of like a ritual object, or they would be, yes, I guess so.
And preciosity is something that you aim to achieve with the ceramics, with the glazing and the colors. There's something.
Yeah, I guess there is something, but also like pushing sort of a like teaming, like an excess. So yeah, I want to like mimic kind of seductive techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I used to be really interested in ideas of like the precious and those things. Maybe less so now, but I think there is something in ceramics that you can do, because it's also so fragile, and kind of that comes through the glazing, doesn't it?
And as well, they may put perhaps the tension between abject and seductivity, sort of a fetishistic objects.
Yes, definitely that.
And what are the origins of the works presented at Richard Saltoun?
The shoes, so they were made for an art fair in Monte Carlo, in Monaco, and it was part of, actually, I guess I was doing a performance there, which was almost like the sequel to Giraffe, or like another rendition of it, but in this very different environment, very different context. Monaco, which is, I mean, it's quite a bizarre place.
It is very strange.
Yeah, and really, like, I don't know. Yeah, I found it really. It was quite an aggressive environment in a way to do that kind of performance, and maybe too much of what. It's a bit of a mirror, I guess. But like those shoes, they were kind of these objects that I'd taken out of earlier drawing work. So I guess I was interested in kind of making them these real emblems, these real symbols. And they're not kind of like, there's not a pair of shoes. So it's very much like the idea of a symbol of a shoe, or but that disintegrating, because it becomes the body and it becomes kind of cankered.
Are they the size of real shoes?
Maybe if you have really small feet. But no, and I think there's also something where, like, I think there's something with feet that's, like the idea that you have to fit into these kind of shoes, but they're like these impossible objects, like, and that you kind of, the pain of getting yourself into those kind of like extremely like elaborate shoes that people do have and wear, and that's very fetishistic as well, I think.
Yeah, and they are positioned on fur.
Yeah.
On rabbit fur.
On rabbit fur. Yeah.
Why?
There's something very seductive about them, for me personally, and the fur and the touch, but also actually they are like remains. They're kind of these dead remains. They're kind of almost like the inside of a shoe. But these ones are from like, I think the pet food industry or something. So they're like dyed remnants. And normally you get them as like luxury, you know, when you get a trim or like one of the like fur pom-poms or something that you see around Monaco probably quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of these different references. I guess fur comes quite a lot in my work, or has done.
Yeah. There's an element of death attached to it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's not like, it's not comfortable in that sense.
Mm.
And obviously there's a lot, you know, I know there's a lot of, fur's not an easy material to use. There's a lot of things attached to it.
And they are very sort of toxic as well in the colors.
Yeah, they're not natural. So I guess there's that thing between synthetic, natural, and things being kind of like infected. Like the interplay with that, and I think with the shoes, the ceramic shoes being not quite what they are, I guess I was interested in that like material dialogue somehow.
Would you qualify your work as feminist?
I mean, I would, but I guess I think it also can sometimes butt up against that a bit, or it's not always like totally, like I see myself as that, but I also think there are some uncomfortable like overlaps.
Mm.
I think it pushes like to the edges of that sometimes. So like yeah. And I guess I'm interested in that. I'm interested in tensions to sort of see. Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it does, in a way that there's sort of an ambiguity of feminism as possibly expressed by Marilyn Minter or Caroline Schneemann, in the sense of embracing the object, male gaze, the body of the woman,
Yeah.
and not being like a feminism that is mostly political and based in a discourse. Is as well an action of embracing your whole as a human being.
Exactly. And that might not necessarily be about, it's always about gender because, well, whatever you identify as, that's a situation. But I do think it's good to try and like push that as well. And like, we're not always, I guess like that's also something about desire, is that you always kind of are coming from a very subjective position. And sometimes you're unconscious, the desires are not always actually correct, you know, necessarily politically correct or easy. So I think there's those things as well that I'm quite interested in trying to think about with the work.
So in that sense, these works kind of, in many ways, encapsulate the essence of your work. When I think about the bigger environment or video works or the performances, especially ones we did, there's something about the tension between seductiveness and the object, being between the fetish and between the body and what is death and life, all these sort of paradoxical elements in the work, which creates a very interesting crystallized tension.
I hope so. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully not too offensive. No.
And I would like to turn this interview into something else just by throwing you words and for you to respond to these words. Words which I think of either notions or elements that you are using a lot in your practice as an artist. And the first word I have in mind is liquid.
I guess there's a theme of things running through that liquids, like the idea of things becoming liquid as a sort of destructive force, but also seductive, and like the theme of maybe you're going to say this word, but piss, or like that idea of like a bodily fluid. So I think when I think of liquids, it's that, but also maybe like liquid as an idea of like surfaces being interrupted, whether that's like a transition on video or it's kind of like this excessive surface. And I guess also like idea of like going under into like a sort of subconscious.
Yeah, totally, the subconscious element and the transformativity of liquid. When we see some of your ceramics from a certain perspective, there's some sort of a liquid element attached to it, which can recall some Art Nouveau artworks, as we already discussed, some sort of a liquid movement. And the fur is quite liquid as well in many ways, especially the rabbit fur. It can take several forms.
Yeah, because it mimics the things that are over it and it's under it rather. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I guess that like idea of like a serpentine line and things, liquid doesn't have boundaries, so it's like it's there and it's kind of, yeah, it's elemental, and I guess it's like a magical thing. Yeah, because you drink it, you have it, well, so you know, if it's in the case of alcohol, it's going in and it's go like pleasure to waste and such. And, yeah.
What about fur?
Well, like skin, how, like, yeah, I guess like seductiveness, but also like an animal aspect. And I think it's something, you're like, I don't know, it's a very, I think you can be very drawn to fur and its texture and like the micro, like looking at fur, like the surface. I guess maybe I'm talking now, I sound like it's just like a fetish, but I think there is something about that that like makes you, yeah. But there's also a kind of gore, there's a death in fur because it is, if it's dead, and that's the thing. And then I think there's something that like, yeah, it almost becomes like something to like a ceremonial thing then. So I think there's things about that with fur, and I know like there's also all this other stuff with like, I don't know, like perfume on fur coats and like ideas of like consumption, what that is, people's kind of discomfort with that. And I think there's like a high and low. There's like a sort of like, people think of fur, they think of luxury, money, wealth, but it's also kind of like a thing, an aspirational thing, and like a camp thing, and all these different ideas. And it's weird that it exists in that, but it's a really natural material and it's been used for like thousands of years. Like, I'm not condoning like fur farms, by the way, it's not a thing, but I just think, yeah, I don't know, it's really interesting as a material.
Mirrors?
I guess there's a lot of like fairy tale imagery. When I think of a mirror, I think of like, you know, yeah, enchanted mirror, like ideas also then of like, yeah, psychoanalytic kind of problematic relationships, but being confronted and distorting views, like mirror, a bit like liquid mirror distorts our perception of what something is, and it's back to front. Also like black mirrors, yeah, magical. So I think it's like playing with illusions and perceptions, and yeah.
And something you have been using quite a lot in your work, cats.
Cats. I'm seeing mine isn't around. She normally is around. Yeah, well, she's my muse, so maybe. Yeah, I think cats. Well, I think they're quite good kind of mediators, like animal mediators. And I like this idea of animals kind of taking control over humans, or like our idea of what they are. So sometimes I in my drawings and things, it will be like these animals having a dominance over human bodies, and like minks, which I guess would be fur, but they're actually alive and kind of biting and orchestrating things. So yeah, I think I quite like the interchange of like human and animal, and like how we try and put our ideas onto them, but really they don't. I don't know. There's this other thing going on.
And what about Yves Saint Laurent?
Yves Saint Laurent. Ah, yeah. Well, I guess like I classic Yves Saint Laurent, as in kind of the heyday of those 70s, amazing kind of. Yeah, I think now not so much, but when he was designing and making these very extravagant, it just like kind of summed up this era of, I guess, excess, but also really like fantasy outfits. There's something quite fairy tale about them in a way that's not too saccharine. So.
And empowering women as well through their look.
Yeah, impact. It's not totally just about sex. It's actually about something else. It's about like dressing in this way and I guess that's something that I think I'm interested in terms of like transformative aspect of clothes or dressing up like that. How can you do that? And that is something about magic in that, and like the idea of glamour. And glamour's like original meaning being like enchantment, witchcraft. So I think there's something related to someone like, or like Thierry Mugler, or like people, those kind of designers, yeah, Yves Saint Laurent from that period.
Yeah, because you're looking a lot as well at fashion.
Yeah.
In your work.
Definitely. Yeah, I do. Well, the idea of like presenting that, and I guess it goes into, again, like ideas of craft, material, like cross discipline. But I think, yeah, fashion is a really like amazing instrument for artworks, or like vice versa. It's, I don't know, because yeah, and also like the absolute non-practicality of a lot of these things, that like it's just not, in reality those things can't actually be, you know, real, but you aspire, or you see outfits like that, and even if you don't have much money or anything, but you think you want to kind of like, you want to project and see how that would feel to be, yeah.
And the shoes that you are showing, you will be showing at Richard Salton, are not inspired by real shoes.
Not really, no. I mean, they're inspired, I guess, by my attempts at like trying to put on shoes that are way too small for me because I've got massive feet. And some shoes, like, you know, that, but it's more of like, I guess I was looking at some much older shoes, kind of like 17th century, 18th century shoes. They're like these impossible little objects, and there's that. And Karorama, some of Karorama's shoes. But yeah, they were much more about these kind of little, I suppose, other surfaces. I was thinking about like infected surfaces and stuff. Yeah.
What about drawing?
Yeah, I guess like as a transformative tool and like a wish fulfillment tool. So to draw something, you can't always make something real, but with drawing it kind of gets it out, and it's a bit almost like a spell or something, or like once it comes, it's halfway into a reality. And I think I've always drawn and like made these kind of, yeah, image equations or situations, or like worked out scenes, and then kind of by drawing it, it either becomes like it's going to happen or it works through.
How do you situate drawings in your practice? Meaning, are they at the beginning of the work, or or not? Maybe are they parallel to the creation of other works?
It depends. Yeah, sometimes they're at the beginning or before, or they might come like in the middle. And sometimes I'll present drawings, I guess. Yeah, like some of the drawings will be kind of ideas for films that I then might make, or scenes. Or it might kind of come as like more of an archival thing afterwards, after something's happened. So I think I made some drawings after maybe we did draft that were kind of inspired by that, but more because in drawing you don't have to like, I think there's something about doing performances and like those big type of things, which actually it's so like much goes into talking and like working out how people, you just become like a production manager sometimes. And I think with drawing you can kind of actually, it's almost a lot more what you want things to be, I guess.
So you like to work, sorry,
No, no.
you like to change sort of the scale of your production from a very intimist practice, which is the drawing, which colors actually are quite close to the ones used in the glazing of the ceramics, to a more epic production like the peplum you can produce when you do performances.
Yeah, I think so. But I really like the intimacy of the drawing. And I guess maybe at the moment, well, I mean, we can't have these big things anyway, but that feels more like going in on the detail and the intimacy of those drawings feels like slightly more relevant right now anyway.